The courtroom was silent, so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the small figure standing in the center of the room. 10-year-old Lily Carter, her blonde hair tied back in a neat ponytail, clutched a piece of paper in her trembling hands. Her father, Michael Carter, sat at the defendant's table, his face pale and his hands cuffed. He was on trial for a crime he swore he didn't commit, embezzling millions from the company he worked for. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the prosecutor had painted him as a greedy, dishonest man. But Lily wasn't about to let her father go to prison without a fight. The judge, a stern woman with sharp features and glasses perched on the edge of her nose, leaned forward. "Young lady, this is highly unusual. You're aware that children are not typically allowed to testify in court, especially without prior notice?" Lily nodded, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I know, Your Honor. But I have something important to say. Something that will prove my dad is innocent." The prosecutor, a tall man in a crisp suit, stood up quickly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense has had ample time to present their case. Allowing this child to speak now would be a waste of the court's time." The defense attorney, a kind-faced woman named Sarah Miller, stood up as well. "Your Honor, if the court would just give Lily a moment to speak, I believe she has information that could change the outcome of this trial." The judge sighed, clearly annoyed but also curious. "Very well. Miss Carter, you may proceed. But make it quick." Lily took a deep breath and unfolded the piece of paper she was holding. Her voice was soft but clear as she began to read. "Your Honor, my dad didn't steal any money. I know because I saw who did it." The courtroom erupted in gasps. The prosecutor's face turned red, and he slammed his hand on the table. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. This child is clearly being coached by the defense to—" "Silence," the judge barked, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. She turned back to Lily, her expression softening just a little. "Go on, Lily. What did you see?" Lily's hands shook as she held up the paper. "It was Mr. Thompson. My dad's boss. I saw him on my dad's computer one night. He was moving money into a secret account. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first, but I wrote it all down. The account numbers, the dates, everything. I didn't tell anyone because I was scared. But I can't let my dad go to jail for something he didn't do." The judge's eyes widened, and she motioned for the bailiff to take the paper from Lily. As the bailiff handed it to her, the judge scanned the contents, her face growing paler with each passing second. The prosecutor, now visibly sweating, tried to object again, but the judge held up a hand to silence him. This changes everything," the judge said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to the prosecutor, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Thompson, you said, correct? The CEO of the company?" Lily nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. He's the one who framed my dad." The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were scribbling furiously in their notebooks, and the spectators were whispering to each other in shock. The judge banged her gavel, demanding order, but the tension in the room was palpable. Michael Carter looked at his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "Lily. I had no idea. You did this for me." Lily nodded, her own eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't let them take you away, Dad. You're the best dad in the world." The judge took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. "This court will take a brief recess to review this new evidence. Bailiff, please escort Miss Carter and her father to a private room. And someone get Mr. Thompson on the phone. Now." As the judge stood and left the room, the tension only grew. Lily's revelation had turned the trial upside down, and no one knew what would happen next. But one thing was certain, this was far from over. The story of how Lily ended up in that courtroom began weeks earlier, in the small, quiet town of Maplewood. Michael Carter was a hard-working man, a single father who had dedicated his life to providing for his daughter. He worked as an accountant at a local tech company, a job he had held for over a decade. But everything changed one fateful morning when he was called into his boss's office. Mr. Thompson, the CEO of the company, was a tall, imposing man with a reputation for being ruthless. He had always been kind to Michael, but that day, his demeanor was cold and distant. "Mikael, we've discovered some irregularities in the company's finances," he said, his voice low and serious. "And all the evidence points to you." Michael was stunned. "Me? I would never steal from this company. I've been loyal to you for years." But Mr. Thompson wasn't swayed. He handed Michael a folder filled with documents, bank statements, transaction records, and emails that seemed to implicate him in a massive embezzlement scheme. "The police are on their way," Mr. Thompson said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I suggest you cooperate." Michael was arrested that same day, and the media quickly picked up the story. "Local accountant accused of stealing millions" was the headline that dominated the news. Lily, who had always been a bright and curious child, couldn't believe what was happening. She knew her father would never do something like that. But as the days turned into weeks, and the evidence against him piled up, she began to feel helpless. One night, as she lay in bed, unable to sleep, she remembered something. A few weeks before her father's arrest, she had been playing on his laptop while he was in the shower. She had accidentally opened a file she wasn't supposed to see, a spreadsheet filled with numbers and names. At the time, she hadn't understood what it was, but now, it all made sense. It was the evidence that could prove her father's innocence. The next morning, Lily went to her father's lawyer, Sarah Miller, and told her everything. Sarah was skeptical at first. After all, what could a 10-year-old possibly know about embezzlement? But as Lily described what she had seen, Sarah realized that this could be the break they needed. Together, they began to piece together the evidence, but time was running out. The trial was set to begin in just a few days, and the prosecution was confident they had an airtight case. On the day of the trial, Lily sat in the back of the courtroom, clutching the piece of paper that held the key to her father's freedom. She watched as the prosecutor presented his case, painting her father as a criminal. She listened as her father's co-workers testified against him, their voices filled with anger and betrayal. And when it was finally her turn to speak, she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Now, as the courtroom buzzed with tension and the judge prepared to review the new evidence, Lily sat in a small room with her father, waiting for the next chapter of their story to unfold. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. As the recess dragged on, the tension in the courtroom grew. Reporters were calling their editors, and the spectators were speculating about what would happen next. The prosecutor, Mr. Harris, was pacing back and forth, his face red with anger. "This is a setup," he muttered to himself. "That girl is lying." But deep down, he wasn't so sure. The look on the judge's face when she read Lily's note had been one of pure shock. And if the evidence was real, well, he didn't want to think about what that would mean for his case. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom, her expression unreadable. She banged her gavel, silencing the room. "This court has reviewed the new evidence presented by Miss Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I must say, it is compelling. Mr. Harris, I suggest you take a moment to review it as well." The prosecutor's face turned pale as the bailiff handed him the note. He scanned it quickly, his hands trembling. "Your Honor, this can't be real. It has to be a forgery." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you accusing a 10-year-old girl of forging evidence, Mr. Harris?" The prosecutor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The judge turned to Lily, her expression softening. "Miss Carter, you've shown incredible bravery today. But I need to ask you one more question. Are you absolutely sure about what you saw?" Lily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm sure." The judge took a deep breath and turned to the bailiff. "Bring in Mr. Thompson." Immediately. The courtroom erupted in gasps once again. The bailiff hurried out of the room, and the tension grew even thicker. Lily's heart was pounding, but she held her head high. She had done what she needed to do. Now, it was up to the court to decide her father's fate. But as the minutes ticked by and the courtroom waited for Mr. Thompson to arrive, one thing was clear: this was far from over. And the next chapter of the story was about to begin. The courtroom was electric with tension as everyone waited for Mr. Thompson to arrive. The bailiff had left to fetch him, and the silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the occasional cough or the rustle of papers. Lily sat next to her father, her small hand gripping his tightly. Michael Carter looked down at his daughter, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Lily," he whispered, his voice cracking, "I don't know how you did this, but, thank you." Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes shining with determination. "I couldn't let them take you away, Dad. You're all I have." Michael squeezed her hand, his heart aching. He had always tried to shield Lily from the harsh realities of the world, but now, she was the one protecting him. He glanced at Sarah Miller, his lawyer, who gave him a reassuring nod. "We're not out of the woods yet," she said quietly, "but this is a game changer." Across the room, the prosecutor, Mr. Harris, was pacing back and forth, his face flushed with frustration. He kept glancing at the door, as if willing Mr. Thompson to appear and somehow fix this mess. But deep down, he knew that if Lily's evidence was real, his case was in serious trouble. Finally, the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and the bailiff stepped inside, followed by Mr. Thompson. The CEO of the tech company looked as composed as ever, his tailored suit immaculate and his expression calm. But as he walked to the front of the room, his eyes flicked to Lily, and for a brief moment, a flicker of unease crossed his face. The judge banged her gavel, silencing the murmurs that had broken out. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for joining us on such short notice. We have some new evidence in this case that requires your attention." Mr. Thompson nodded, his voice smooth and confident. "Of course, Your Honor. I'm happy to assist in any way I can." The judge handed the piece of paper Lily had provided to the bailiff, who passed it to Mr. Thompson. As he read it, his face remained impassive, but his hands tightened slightly around the edges of the paper. When he finished, he looked up, his expression calm but his eyes cold. "Your Honor, I'm not sure what this is supposed to prove. These numbers and account details could have been fabricated. I assure you, I have no knowledge of any illegal activities." The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Mr. Thompson, this evidence was provided by a 10-year-old girl who claims to have seen you accessing her father's computer and moving funds into a secret account. Do you deny these allegations?" Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I do, Your Honor. This is clearly a desperate attempt by the defendant to shift the blame. I have no reason to steal from my own company." The prosecutor, Mr. Harris, jumped in, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is absurd. Mr. Thompson is a respected businessman with an impeccable reputation. To accuse him based on the word of a child is..." "Enough," the judge snapped, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. She turned to Lily, her expression softening slightly. "Miss Carter, do you have anything else to add?" Lily stood up, her small frame trembling but her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I have something else." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "This has the files I saw on my dad's computer. I copied them before he was arrested. I didn't know what they were at the time, but now I do." The courtroom erupted in gasps once again. The judge motioned for the bailiff to take the USB drive, and within moments, it was plugged into a laptop and projected onto a screen for everyone to see. The files were exactly as Lily had described, spreadsheets filled with account numbers, transaction dates, and amounts that matched the embezzlement scheme Michael had been accused of. But there was one crucial difference: the files were time-stamped, and they showed that the transactions had been made from Mr. Thompson's personal computer, not Michael's. The judge's face turned pale as she scanned the documents. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "do you care to explain this?" Mr. Thompson's composure finally cracked. His face turned red, and he slammed his hand on the table. "This is a setup. Someone must have planted those files on my computer. I would never." "Silence," the judge roared, her voice echoing through the room. She turned to the bailiff. "Take Mr. Thompson into custody. We'll need to investigate this further." The courtroom exploded into chaos as the bailiff approached Mr. Thompson, who was now shouting protests and demanding to speak to his lawyer. The prosecutor, Mr. Harris, looked like he was about to have a heart attack, his face pale and his hands trembling. Michael Carter sat frozen in his seat, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. Lily, meanwhile, looked relieved but exhausted, her small shoulders sagging under the weight of everything she had been through. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but it took several minutes for the room to quiet down. When it did, she turned to Michael, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, given the new evidence presented today, I am dismissing all charges against you. You are free to go." Michael's breath caught in his throat, and tears filled his eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The judge nodded, then turned to Lily. "Miss Carter, you have shown incredible courage and intelligence today. You should be very proud of yourself." Lily smiled faintly, but her eyes were already drooping with exhaustion. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the bailiff led Mr. Thompson out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the spectators began to file out, their voices buzzing with excitement. Reporters were already on their phones, calling in the breaking news. Michael hugged Lily tightly, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "You saved me, Lily," he whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you." Lily hugged him back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "You're my dad," she said simply. "I couldn't let them take you away." Sarah Miller watched the scene with a smile, her heart warmed by the bond between father and daughter. But as she glanced at the empty seat where Mr. Thompson had been sitting, a sense of unease settled over her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Michael and Lily returned home to a hero's welcome, their small house filled with friends and neighbors who had heard about the trial. The media descended on Maplewood, eager to interview the 10-year-old girl who had taken down a corrupt CEO. Lily, shy but determined, answered their questions with a maturity far beyond her years. But not everyone was celebrating. Mr. Thompson, now in custody, was fighting back with everything he had. His lawyers were working overtime to discredit Lily's evidence, claiming that the files on the USB drive had been tampered with. The prosecutor, Mr. Harris, was under intense scrutiny for his handling of the case, and rumors were swirling that he had known about Mr. Thompson's involvement all along. Meanwhile, Michael was struggling to adjust to his newfound freedom. He had lost his job at the tech company, and the stress of the trial had taken a toll on his health. But through it all, Lily was his rock. She helped him around the house, cooked simple meals, and even insisted on helping him look for a new job. "We're a team, Dad," she said one evening as they sat on the couch, watching the news. "We'll get through this together." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're amazing, Lily. I don't know what I did to deserve you." But as the days turned into weeks, the shadows of the past began to creep back in. One night, as Michael was checking the mail, he found a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message: "You think you've won? This isn't over." Michael's hands trembled as he read the words. He quickly crumpled the paper and threw it away, not wanting to worry Lily. But deep down, he knew that the fight wasn't over. Someone was still out there, someone who wasn't ready to let go of the past. And as he looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully on the couch, he vowed to do whatever it took to protect her. No matter what. The next morning, Michael woke up to the sound of Lily's voice. Dad! Dad, come quick! He rushed into the living room, his heart pounding. Lily was standing by the window, her face pale. Look, she said, pointing outside. Michael followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. Parked across the street was a black car with tinted windows. As he watched, the engine roared to life, and the car sped away, disappearing around the corner. Michael's mind raced. Who was in that car? Were they being watched? He turned to Lily, forcing a smile. It's probably nothing, sweetheart. Just someone lost. But Lily wasn't convinced. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her voice trembled as she spoke. Dad, what if they're coming for us? Michael knelt down and took her hands in his. Listen to me, Lily. No one is going to hurt us. I promise. We'll figure this out together. But as he held his daughter close, his mind was already racing with plans. They couldn't stay here. They needed to disappear, at least for a little while. Until they could be sure they were safe. The fight wasn't over. And the next chapter of their story was about to begin. The black car lingered in Michael's mind like a dark cloud as he and Lily packed their bags that evening. He tried to keep his movements calm and deliberate, not wanting to alarm his daughter any further, but his heart was racing. The letter, the car, it was too much of a coincidence. Someone was watching them, and he couldn't take any chances. Where are we going, Dad? Lily asked, her voice small as she folded her favorite sweater and placed it in her backpack. She had been quiet since spotting the car, her usual spark dimmed by fear. Michael forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Just a little trip, sweetheart. We'll stay with Aunt Sarah for a few days. It'll be like a vacation. Lily nodded, but her brow furrowed. Are we in trouble? Michael knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. No, Lily. We're not in trouble. But sometimes, when things get complicated, it's better to take a step back and figure things out. That's all we're doing, okay? Lily searched his face for a moment, then nodded again. Okay, Dad. By the time they finished packing, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the living room. Michael peeked out the window, scanning the street for any sign of the black car. It was gone, but the unease remained. He grabbed their bags and ushered Lily to the car, his eyes darting around as they walked to the driveway. The drive to Sarah Miller's house was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Lily stared out the window, her hands clutching her backpack tightly. Michael kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following them. But the road behind them stayed empty. When they arrived at Sarah's house, she was waiting on the porch, her arms crossed and her expression serious. Michael, she said as they approached, what's going on? You sounded frantic on the phone. Michael set the bags down and ran a hand through his hair. Someone's watching us, Sarah. I don't know who, but they left a threatening letter, and Lily saw a black car parked outside the house. I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Sarah's eyes widened, and she quickly ushered them inside. You did the right thing. Come in, both of you. We'll figure this out. The house was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension that had filled their own home. Sarah led them to the living room, where a fire crackled in the fireplace. Lily sat on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, while Michael and Sarah spoke in hushed tones in the kitchen. This is bad, Michael, Sarah said, her voice low. If someone's targeting you, it's probably connected to the trial. Thompson has a lot of powerful friends, and they're not going to let this go easily. Michael nodded, his jaw tight. I know. But what am I supposed to do? I can't just sit around and wait for them to come after us. Sarah sighed, leaning against the counter. We need to be smart about this. I'll reach out to some contacts in the police department and see if they can provide protection. In the meantime, you and Lily should stay here. It's safer than being out in the open. Michael agreed, though the thought of putting Sarah in danger made his stomach churn. Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what we'd do without you. Sarah gave him a small smile. You'd figure it out. You've got a fighter in that little girl of yours. She's the reason you're still standing, you know. Michael glanced into the living room, where Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her face peaceful despite everything. Yeah, he said softly. She's everything. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah worked tirelessly to secure protection for Michael and Lily, but the process was slow, and the threat seemed to loom larger with each passing hour. Michael tried to keep things as normal as possible for Lily, but it was hard to ignore the tension that hung in the air. One afternoon, as Michael and Lily were playing a board game at the kitchen table, Sarah walked in, her face pale. Michael, she said, her voice trembling, we need to talk. Michael's stomach dropped. What is it? Sarah handed him her phone, which displayed a news article. The headline read, Former CEO's allies vow to clear his name, no matter the cost. The article detailed how Mr. Thompson's powerful friends were rallying behind him, claiming that the evidence against him had been fabricated and that Michael and Lily were part of a conspiracy to ruin his reputation. Michael's hands shook as he read the article. This is insane. They're turning this into a witch hunt. Sarah nodded grimly. It gets worse. I just got off the phone with a friend at the police department. They've received anonymous tips claiming that you're involved in illegal activities. They're reopening the investigation. Michael slammed his hand on the table, causing Lily to jump. What? That's ridiculous. They can't just. They can, Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. And they will. Unless we can prove that these allegations are false, they're going to come after you again. Lily, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. What if we find more evidence? Something that proves Mr. Thompson is lying? Michael and Sarah exchanged a look. It's not that simple, Lily, Michael said gently. We don't even know where to start. But Lily's eyes were determined. What about the files on the USB drive? There has to be more information there. Maybe we missed something. Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded. It's worth a shot. Let's take another look. They spent the rest of the afternoon poring over the files, searching for anything that could help their case. It was tedious work, and Michael's frustration grew with each passing hour. But just as they were about to give up, Lily let out a small gasp. Dad, look at this, she said, pointing to a line in one of the spreadsheets. This account number, it's different from the others. And there's a note here. It says, Project Phoenix. Michael and Sarah leaned in, their eyes scanning the document. Project Phoenix. Sarah repeated, her brow furrowed. What does that mean? Michael's heart raced as he pulled up a search engine on his laptop and typed in the term. The results were sparse, but one article caught his eye. It was from a financial news site, dated several months earlier. The headline read, Rumors of Secret Project at Thompson Tech, What Are They Hiding? The article detailed rumors of a covert project within Thompson's company, one that involved large sums of money and questionable practices. But the details were vague, and the company had denied any wrongdoing. This could be it, Michael said, his voice filled with hope. If we can find out what Project Phoenix is, we might be able to prove that Thompson was behind the embezzlement. Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. We'll need to dig deeper. But this is a start. As they continued to search, Lily sat back, her mind racing. She didn't fully understand everything that was happening, but she knew one thing for sure, they were closer to the truth than ever before. And she wasn't going to stop until they found it. That night, as Michael tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. Dad, are we going to be okay? Michael smoothed her hair back and kissed her forehead. We're going to be just fine, sweetheart. We've got each other, and we've got Sarah. We'll figure this out. Lily nodded, her eyes already closing as exhaustion took over. Michael stayed by her side until her breathing evened out, then quietly left the room. He found Sarah in the kitchen, her laptop open and her face tense. "Anything?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. But I've reached out to a few contacts who might be able to help. We'll know more soon." Michael sat down across from her, his mind racing. "Sarah, what if this is bigger than we thought? What if Thompson's involved in something even worse than embezzlement?" Sarah met his gaze, her expression grim. "Then we'll deal with it. But for now, we focus on what we know. And we keep Lily safe." Michael nodded, though the weight of everything felt crushing. He glanced at the clock, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. But as he sat there, a sudden noise broke the silence. It was faint at first, like the creak of a floorboard, but it grew louder. Michael froze, his heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her eyes wide. "Stay here." She stood up and walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat. "Michael," she whispered, "there's someone outside." Michael's blood ran cold. He grabbed a baseball bat from the corner of the room and joined Sarah at the door. Through the peephole, he could see a shadowy figure standing on the porch, their face obscured by a hood. Before he could react, the figure raised a hand and knocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house. Michael's grip tightened on the bat. "Who's there?" he called, his voice shaking. There was a pause, then a voice replied, low and urgent. "It's me. Open the door." Michael and Sarah exchanged a look. The voice was familiar, but they couldn't place it. Slowly, Michael unlocked the door and opened it a crack. Standing on the porch was a man they hadn't seen in years, a former colleague of Michael's from Thompson Tech. His face was pale, and his eyes darted around nervously. "Michael," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." He held out a flash drive, his hand trembling. "It's everything. Everything they don't want you to know." Michael stared at the flash drive, his mind racing. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced over his shoulder, his fear palpable. "There's no time to explain. Just take it. And whatever you do, don't let them find you." Before Michael could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the night, leaving the flash drive in his hand. Michael closed the door, his heart pounding. Sarah looked at him, her face pale. "What just happened?" Michael stared at the flash drive, his mind reeling. "I don't know. But I think we're about to find out." As he plugged the flash drive into Sarah's laptop, the screen lit up with files, dozens of them, each more incriminating than the last. And at the top of the list was a folder labeled Project Phoenix. The fight wasn't over. And the next chapter of their story was about to begin.